China's a country I describe as the engineering state because they build a lot. They also treat society as a big engineering project. It really feels like people are yet another building material that the leadership just want to tweak and remold and destroy if necessary.
Hello and welcome to GZERO World. I'm Ian Bremmer, and today we are talking about China, the United States, and the race to build the future. These two countries have been locked in an escalating trade war. After a successful meeting between Presidents Trump and Xi, they may be entering a period of relative stability. But long-term, the trajectory is still fierce competition for power, for influence, and for technological might. My guest calls China an engineering state, a nation that believes almost anything can be designed, optimized, and controlled, for better and for worse. Is Washington falling behind Beijing? Can the United States learn from China's rapid rise and avoid repeating its mistakes? I'm joined today by Dan Wang, technology analyst and author of the new book, Breakneck, China's Quest to Engineer the Future. But first, a word from the folks who help us keep the lights on.
Funding for GZERO World is provided by our lead sponsor, Prologis, and by Cox, a family of businesses. Additional funding provided by Carnegie Corporation of New York, Ku and Patricia Ewan, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities, and
We talk a lot about competition between the United States and China, but they actually have quite a bit in common. They are the world's two largest economies. They're restless, ambitious, addicted to growth. They dream big, they spend bigger. And both are betting their futures on infrastructure. Over the past 2 decades, China has poured more concrete than the United States did in the entire 20th century. High-speed rail? Check. Mega dams, bridges, airports, entire cities built from scratch? Check, check, and check. Meanwhile, the United States is building servers, chips, algorithms, data centers. Tech companies are spending extraordinary amounts to build the highways of the digital future. Earlier this year, OpenAI, SoftBank, and Oracle announced a $500 billion AI infrastructure investment at the White House called Stargate.
It's the largest AI infrastructure project by far in history. And it's all taking place right here in America.
They are trying to invest in the growth of artificial intelligence infrastructure in the U.S. That is data centers, but also the electricity, the water resources that are needed, the computer chips.
Google, Amazon, and Microsoft are in the middle of record spending sprees. NVIDIA's Jensen Huang says his company will build 7 new supercomputers for the Department of Energy. By 2030, total AI infrastructure spending in the U.S. could hit several trillion dollars. That's trillion with a T. For comparison, the entire U.S. interstate system cost about $600 billion in today's dollars. What's happening now, data centers the size of towns, massive grid updates, global chip supply chains, is unlike anything the West has ever seen. But there is one parallel: China. No country has spent more on infrastructure, many, many trillions over the past 2 decades, and the results are staggering. More high-speed rail than the rest of the world combined. Megacities built from nothing, soaring GDP growth, hundreds of millions lifted into the middle class. But after the boom comes the bust, because it turns out China didn't just build, it overbuilt. The country is now littered with underused rail lines, half-vacant industrial parks, and ghost cities with enough apartments to house the population of France. Local governments that finance all that construction are drowning in debt. The housing market is in the midst of a multi-year collapse. Deflation is creeping in. Youth unemployment in China is around 20%. China's experience is both a roadmap and a warning. Bold, coordinated investment can transform a nation. The United States, long paralyzed by political gridlock and regulatory red tape, could use a dose of that ambition for its own infrastructure. If America wants to lead in AI, it needs to build fast. But when spending outpaces strategy, innovation becomes speculation. And just as China assumed cities would fill themselves, Silicon Valley believes that AI will eventually justify its cost. And it very well might. Or maybe we'll build too much, too fast. China bet on physical infrastructure. The U.S. is gambling on digital. And if AI doesn't deliver on its promise, both could end up in the same place, buried under the weight of their own ambitions. Here to help us understand the limits of that ambition and what the United States can learn from China's growth is Dan Wang, author of the new book, Breakneck. Dan Wang, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great to be here, Ian.
So, lots of ways into the U.S.-China conversation. I want to start with, one that I'm sure you've been asked before, which is, you say that in the opening of your book that there are no two peoples that are more alike than Americans and Chinese. I always thought it was Americans and Canadians, so you're going to have to explain that to me.
Well, I am Canadian, and plenty of us blend in very well with the U.S., and we've exported a lot of comedians over to the U.S. who...
That is true. Too many, some would say. Yes.
Not enough, others would say. So maybe Americans need a little bit more comedy at this very moment. I think that Europeans and Japanese are very alike. There is a sense of coziness, comfort. There is a sense of perfectionism in these two big regions in which they are really good at making a lot of things really well, and everything is super pleasant. I think that Chinese and Americans are much more alike. There is a sense of hastiness with these two people. There's a sense of the technological sublime that really want to pursue these big engineering technological projects. There is a sense in which these are two great powers, and other countries like puny Canada is not, and that the US and China are the countries that are going to be changing the world. And when I'm in the US, when I'm in China, I feel like there is just this sense of entrepreneurial hustle. There's this hunger. There's people who want to make donuts in a way that the Europeans don't really have anymore. And so that, I think, is the big uniting feature between the Chinese and the Americans.
Look, as a kid that grew up in Boston, time to make the donuts really does resonate with me, right? But when I hear that people talk about China of late, and especially the youth in China, I hear about laying flat. I don't hear about hustle. I hear about Chinese young people that are less entrepreneurial. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong, but there is also a sense of the American kids who are quiet quitting. And so that is just yet another analog here. I'm speaking to you from San Francisco, where there are a lot of youths who have decided to quietly quit. But there is also a sense of entrepreneurial drive that you can see very visibly in Silicon Valley, that you would be able to see very visibly in China, that there are electric vehicle makers, there are still all sorts of consumer internet companies, there are still kids starting hedge funds, much in the same way that people from Boston might. And so I think that there is still quite a lot of entrepreneurial energy where people want to wake up and smell the donuts.
There's been a lot of private sector question mark in China over the past 15 years. To what extent it's okay to get rich, to what extent it's okay to be an individual entrepreneur and to be liked, even loved by Chinese society. The Jack Ma, out again, back again, but certainly not what he used to be when young kids would sometimes have his photo up in their rooms, like a rock star. How clear is it to an entrepreneur in China that the system actually wants them to succeed?
I think that there are deep uncertainties here. And can you imagine anything more terrifying than Xi Jinping smothering love as he sometimes greets some of these entrepreneurs? I think that there is some uncertainty among a lot of entrepreneurs, whether they are going to be still able to pursue all of the activities that make them get up in the morning, or whether the Communist Party will decide to smash a lot of their businesses, as the Communist Party did in 2020 and 2021. I think there is going to be, a lingering sense that if the Chinese economy somehow vastly improves in some sort of a miraculous way, that Xi Jinping won't be up to his own tricks and really try to have smothering love or smack a lot of companies around just because he can. But here again, Ian, I promised this last time, I want to apply, some American equivalents to what's going on in China because, President Donald Trump has also treated a lot of tech entrepreneurs with smothering love. And I feel that Xi Jinping would be a little bit embarrassed and a little bit blushing if he had so many tech leaders organized around him over dinner, essentially singing his praises. And so, here's where, the Xi goes into the entrepreneurs and, gives them blessings upon the head. And that is something that Donald Trump is doing as well.
Well, the fundamental difference, of course, and I'm not suggesting that you're saying that one is better or worse, is that in the United States, that smothering love is actually coming with a lot of money from these technology companies that's meant to ensure that the regulatory environment, the tax environment is actually one that they get to write principally, that they get to determine their own regs. Life under the Chinese Communist Party is very, very different from that perspective.
There is no doubt. I think that if you are an elite in Beijing, your life is precarious in much more severe ways than if you're an elite in New York, Boston, DC, San Francisco, wherever else. That if you are an upper upper class person in Beijing, maybe you're working in something like finances, and Xi Jinping announces, as he does last year, that there's a salary cap in the financial sector such that people can't make more than $300,000 a year. And some who do make over that, then they have to give back some of their back pay. Entrepreneurs never know if Xi Jinping will smash one of their companies again, as he did with online tutoring, a lot of video games, cryptocurrencies, Jack Ma, you name it. And if you're in the military party state elite, you never really know if one of your patrons will be felled for corruption, in which case his entire network goes down. And so I definitely agree that there is a much greater sense of precarity in China, such that many elites are put off guard, and many of them want to have foreign passports, foreign homes, foreign options, and send their kids abroad as well.
Now, you've lived in China for what, about 10 years? Total?
6 years, 2017 to 2023.
A long time, enough to have more than a passing acquaintance. From that time, from that experience, what's the thing that you would most like to see exported to the United States?
How about a sense of love of heavy industry, manufacturing, a sense that the industrial, physical world is really, really important? I think that there are ways in which China is showing up the United States in all sorts of, let's say, public works, as well as the manufacturing base. I'm speaking to you from San Francisco, where this is a state that has been trying to build high-speed rail now for about 17 years. This is in 2008, California voters approved a referendum to build high-speed rail between San Francisco and Los Angeles. How many people have taken high-speed rail? The number is 0, and probably for the next 10 years, the number will still be 0 between San Francisco and Los Angeles. The Chinese are able to build a lot of things that meet the material needs of the people, namely homes, namely solar, wind, nuclear, coal plants, roads, bridges, high-speed rail. I think that really gives people a sense of optimism for the past. If you are a resident of Shanghai, you're getting new parks on a yearly basis. You might be getting new subway stations. You might get new high-speed rail connections. And given that your life has been better and better over the past decade, you also expect that the future will be better as well. And that is something that I want Americans to have, as well as a more robust manufacturing base.
So are you saying that the China dream, as Xi Jinping has put it, is something that even still today really does resonate with the average Chinese citizen?
I don't know what an average Chinese citizen means. I don't know what an average American citizen means. But I think for broad swaths of the Chinese public, life is still getting better in pretty crucial ways. As I said, if you're a resident of Shanghai, you're getting more ways to get around the city. If you're a resident of Guizhou, which is a province in China's deep southwest, very inaccessible, highly mountainous, China's fourth poorest province, I spent 5 days cycling through the southwestern province of Guizhou in the year 2021. Guizhou just now opened the world's tallest bridge.
It is an extraordinary, the one with the restaurant on top, right?
Restaurant, cafe, dancing hall, arcade,
And they built it in 4 years?
Built it probably something like that under a heavy debt load, but they are constructing a lot of these mountain villages that are going to be better connected through these bridges. And so I think that if you are a resident of the urban areas as well as the countryside, you're getting better infrastructure. If you're in Guizhou, you're getting tied up with other villages, other towns. Perhaps you can take the high-speed rail to Shanghai because Guizhou is tied up into the network. And so I think there is still a broad sense in which you're looking at the landscape transform around you and feeling more optimistic about the future.
So I think back not so many years ago to the pandemic when, of course, the Chinese had put zero COVID rules in place for the country for far longer than anyone else and with far greater consequence. They were very, very proud of it. And then a lot of people got really, really fed up with it. That seemed to undermine trust. Was that not so significant, or has that been forgotten, washed away in the context of everything else that's happening?
I think that it was significant, and also to some extent, it is being forgotten. So part of what I write about in my book is that China is a country I describe as the engineering state because it is made up of so many elites within the Politburo who have had training in engineering. They treat the environment as an engineering project. They build a lot. They treat the economy as an engineering project by smashing companies or trying to direct investment away from real estate. They also treat society as a big engineering project. And so I spend a lot of time writing about the horrors of the one-child policy as well as zero COVID, in which it really feels like people are yet another building material that the leadership just want to tweak and remold and destroy if necessary. I think that zero COVID is important. I situate it as one of the several enormous traumas that the Communist Party has visited against the Chinese people over the nearly 8 decades of its rule. I think about the famine that was created by the Great Leap Forward. I think about the madness of the Cultural Revolution. I think about the brutality of the one-child policy.
One-child policy, yeah, sure.
As well as the insanity of zero COVID. And I think there are two things that really help people get through zero COVID, one of which is alcohol, another is economic growth. And I think that this is something that the Shanghainese are able to indulge in both. And past a certain point, I think people don't really want to dwell on their national traumas. The COVID experience in the US also radicalized a lot of people. And I think people have to some extent been able to move on in the US just as they have in China.
And what about the state of China? I mean, the United States, in some ways, the headlines overdo the level of dysfunctionality in the U.S. social and political systems. In China, they whitewash them. I mean, back when I was a student in the Soviet Union, of course, there was a lot of cynicism about what you'd read in the press and a recognition that you were being lied to constantly. How aware are young people in China? How cynical are they about what they're being fed by state news organs?
I think there is a general level of skepticism about what is going on in the news because the lived experience for many young people has not been excellent for the last few years. That young people were disproportionately affected by the crackdowns on the consumer internet sector, people working in online education, people working at Jack Ma's companies, either Alibaba or Ant Financial. A lot of people have suffered through that. A lot of the people who have started new businesses catering to tourists or other consumers, whether that is some sort of a new cafe, bubble tea shop, some sort of thing in the services industry, a lot of tourism has been smashed. And I think it is absolutely the case that youth unemployment is pretty high and people are having a hard time finding jobs. And so I think that is a question of balance about how people feel about, life is pretty convenient in all sorts of ways in Shanghai. Perhaps many young Chinese live with their parents, which is culturally much more common in China and the rest of East Asia. Maybe they are pretty thrilled about getting still new noodle shops that they're able to try, new parks that they're able to try. But I think, that is balanced with a general unease. I think the young people who have suffered the most are people involved in some aspect of journalism, some creative types involved in filmmaking, stand-up comedy, in which the regime has gotten much more censorious in the recent past. I've met many young Chinese who have decided to emigrate. And so many of them have felt the strangling chokehold of the censors in the recent few years, and they have decided to take leave of that regime.
Talk about the U.S.-China relationship for me a little bit, Dan. Do you think that there is a sense of reality from both sides as to what they are trying to achieve?
Probably not. I think asking for reality from within the Communist Party or the White House right now would be stretching it a little bit. I think that the relationship between the U.S. and China is uncertain, and right now it actually appears relatively friendly against my expectations, at least. I think that is very substantially because right now Donald Trump appears to be the most pro-China member of the White House, which could have gone in a very different way, especially if the trade war unfolded with 150% tariffs on all Chinese goods. And I always felt that even when I was living through the first trade war in Beijing, I'd never really felt that Trump was really, antagonistic necessarily towards the Chinese people. And that many Chinese remarked that he usually says great things about China. His granddaughter, the daughter of Ivanka Trump, has learned Mandarin. He seems to be much more upset with the Germans and the Japanese, which is very, very strange. And right now, the bromance between Xi and Trump is real. It seems like there will be state visits in Beijing as well as Washington, D.C. I'm not especially optimistic that that this relationship will not somehow fall into peril once again, because, again, throughout the first trade war, the U.S. and China were often at odds, even after they seemed to be really close to making a deal. So I'm not sure that this will be all lovey-dovey for a very long time.
Well, one thing that we know is that Trump is very much opposed to people that can make Trump's life more difficult. And Xi Jinping has that capacity in ways that virtually, maybe perhaps no other leader on the global stage does. That's because, obviously, after Liberation Day, Trump's willingness to escalate against China was also unprecedented, right? But so it's not like you were wrong in suggesting that Trump was going to come out of the gates hot. It's just that he's backed off very, very substantially. So perhaps the surprise is that China was willing to be as assertive as quickly this time around compared to in the first term.
That's right. I think that especially there was one thing that Beijing did, which was to control the export of rare earth magnets.
Yeah, the licensing regime, yeah.
That's right. In defense materials as well as automotives and all sorts of other goods. But what was really striking to me was still, even though the Chinese were indeed, I agree, pretty aggressive, there was still relative restraint there, because I think that rare earth magnets are not China's only chokehold. There are all sorts of chokeholds available to the Chinese. I'm thinking about all sorts of electronic products, all sorts of batteries. Pharmaceuticals, almost all fermented antibiotics, almost all ibuprofen is made in China. So imagine if they actually had a chokehold over ibuprofen. Imagine if they had more of a chokehold over all sorts of electronic products. I think that they only flex but one finger. And if they flex more, they could really have put the U.S. economy into a stranglehold. Perhaps this is one of the reasons that Trump is actually quite nice at the moment.
Dan Wang, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Ian.
That's our show this week. Come back next week, and if you like what you see, or even if you don't, but you have a plan to engineer your own country from the ground up, we can help you with that. Take a minute to sign up for our most excellent morning newsletter. It's called GZERO Daily.
Funding for GZERO World is provided by our lead sponsor, Prologis, and by Cox, a family of businesses. Additional funding provided by Carnegie Corporation of New York, Ku and Patricia Ewan, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities, and